recognize we are all Indigenous peoples and are committed to working in partnership with Indigenous communities toward health equity, justice, and reconciliation. I'm going to go through a couple of housekeeping items before we move on to our agenda tonight. As I mentioned, we're using Zoom and phone connections tonight solely. Last year, we tried out Zoom connection as part of the AGM to help make it more accessible to all registrants. And so this year with the pandemic, it was great that we had the practice last year. But of course, because we are fully virtual this year, well, there might be a couple of hiccups, and so please bear with us with that. So for those of you who have joined online, please check to make sure that your name is displayed with both your first and last names. This is going to be important for the polling and voting functions, and also if you have a question, we want to be able to address you appropriately. If you're not sure, or if the name isn't showing up correctly, you can click on the 3 small dots that are in the top right-hand corner of your image there, of your picture, and you'll get a drop-down menu. You can select rename from there and then enter in your full name. Okay. Another thing is, as I mentioned right before we started, we will be muting everyone, both on the phone and online. If you are online, and also if you get a notification that your connection is unstable, or if the audio becomes choppy, we recommend turning off your video, and that should improve it. Why am I muted? Oops.
You're okay.
Okay. So I want to go over a couple of the features that we're going to be using during the meeting tonight. As I mentioned, we're going to be using the chat function. So we're going to be using this for making and seconding a motion, and also for asking questions. Again, if you only are on telephone and you wish to ask a question, you can unmute yourself at *6 and proceed from there. We're also going to be using the poll function tonight for voting on the motion, and that will pop up on your screen. And again, for those of you who don't have screen access, there will be an opportunity for you to respond verbally. And we ask that you unmute yourself and state your name and respond. So at this point, I would like to call the 2020 CDM Annual General Meeting to order. Okay. Are we okay? All right. There you go. So our first item of business tonight is adoption of the minutes from the CDM Annual General Meeting on October 23rd, 2019. So the minutes from the 2019 AGM were posted online on the college website, and a link was distributed to all members via email. So at this point, can I have a motion for the acceptance of the minutes of the October 23rd, 2019 CDM Annual General Meeting? Please type "I will" in the chat box. Okay. I get the motion from Jenny Cowan, and as a seconder, Amanda Nash. Thank you very much. So the motion will read: the minutes of the October 23rd, 2019 CDM Annual General Meeting are adopted. Now, at this point, are there any discussion or corrections to the minutes? All right, well, hearing and seeing none, I would like to call for the vote. And we'll just give it a minute to make sure everyone has a chance to enter their vote. And again, for anyone who is on the phone, if you are opposed to this motion, please indicate it verbally, and you can unmute yourself by using *6. All right, thank you everyone for your participation. The motion is passed. All right, the next item on the agenda tonight is the registrar's report. So please give us a second while we transition over to Shonda Durance-Todd.
Sorry about that. All right. So the annual report for 2019-2020 is posted on the college website. And a link to that was sent out to registrants. There's a few highlights that I'd like to go through to show to you. If you've got any questions while I'm going through, please put them in the chat, or I'll stop for questions along the way, and anybody who's on the phone can ask the questions in that way. I'd like to first of all apologize for the colored lines that are on the slides. We took a minute to see if we could figure out the source of those, and I'm not sure where there's some, but see if I can get rid of them later on. Okay, so the college is in the final year of a 3-year strategic plan. The pillars of the plan are regulatory accountability, succession planning, satisfying requirements of the Regulated Health Professionals Act, and to develop policies to meet the requirements of the Office of the Manitoba Fairness Commissioner. In 2019 to 2020, so the year ending March 31st of 2020, I'm just going to run through a few of the achievements. And so first of all, we separated the CC and the license renewal deadlines. So CC is due now January 31st, and that is then a gap of 2 months until the license renewal deadline of March 31st. And that satisfies a requirement within the Registered Dietitians regulations that ensures the satisfaction of that CC requirement for license renewal. We also completed a joint module with 7 other health regulatory colleges in Manitoba on social media and professionalism. And this is to satisfy or to address a pillar of the STRAT plan to help registrants understand their professional responsibilities. Thirdly, we worked on strengthening HR practices. So there were several HR policies that the college revised with council, and also established an employee benefit program. And then the final thing I wanted to just highlight too is strengthening of our standing committee functions. So one of the major items here was implementing a board evaluation process for council meetings. Are there any questions about the achievements that I've just gone through with those slides? If not, I'll move on then to a summary of the financial report. So in terms of membership fees, we had in a revenue of $292,138. Our disbursements were $256,252. And our short and long-term investments are at, were at March 31st, $205,260. Are there any questions about the financial report? How many members do we have? It is between 475 and 490, I believe. I'm trying to remember what exactly it was at March 31st, but it's in that range. Sandra, do you want to chime in?
I could look up exact numbers, but that would take me a bit of time.
It's okay. It's in that range. It's under 500.
That's exactly right, Shonda.
Any other questions? All right. If there are none, I will move on then. What did that again? There we go. So I would just like to highlight some current projects that we're working on now. So this is in the current year, and again, this is the last year, the final year of the 3-year strat plan. So we launched a license check dietitian registry at the end of April. So you may recall that we last year we were talking about an update of our database, which allowed us then to launch an online registry. So instead of people needing to call our office to check on the registration of a particular person, we can direct them to this link on our website where they can verify the registration of a member. Secondly, we established the jurisprudence program at the end of August, and that requires completion of the social media and professionalism module by January 31st as part of the CC program before renewal. So it aligns with the deadline for the CC program as well. And then thirdly, we are in the process of updating or looking at ways to update the college CC program. And fourthly, we are in the process of strengthening the governance committee. I'm now going to turn it over. Oh, actually, I should ask before we move on to that, if there are any questions about any of the projects that we are currently working on with the in this current year. All right, if there are none, I will now turn it over to Laura, who is going to introduce our guest speaker. Hang on as well while we just transfer the camera back over.
Want to come in?
So there is a question in the chat that I'd just like to answer. So the question is, there's a more of a comment, I guess, than a question. The license check is easy to find on the CDM website, but not as easy for people to find a dietitian. And so really that speaks to our role as a regulator to regulate the practice of dietetics. So it's important that members of the public can verify the registration status of a dietitian or someone who's calling themselves a dietitian to ensure that they are regulated. And so that's why that's very prominent on the website. We're looking at the Find a Dietitian section that's on our website, and that you know, there may be a better place to put that. Anything else that anyone wanted to ask? If not, then we're actually going to move ahead to our next agenda item because we're a little bit early for our guest speaker. So just bear with me for one moment. Oh, Jennifer is here. Okay. All right. So I'm going to still move the camera over to Laura.
All right. Thank you, Shonda, for that overview. So as Sean mentioned, the next item on our agenda tonight is our guest speaker, and I am pleased to introduce Dr. Jennifer Brady, who's going to be speaking to us tonight. So Dr. Jennifer Brady is a registered dietitian and assistant professor in applied human nutrition at Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Her research program draws on critical and feminist theory, as well as mixed and qualitative methods to explore the intersections of food, health, and social justice. Her current projects include an archival and oral history of home economics in Canada's maritime provinces, community-based exploration of cultural food security for newcomers to Canada, and the roles that health professionals should and could play in advancing social justice. Her work appears in the Journal of Critical Dietetics, Food, Culture, and Society, Critical Public Health, Fat Studies, a Journal of Body Weight and Society, and the Canadian Journal of Dietetic Practice and Research. She's a co-editor of Feminist Food Studies, Intersectional Perspectives, a volume that expands feminist intersectional analyses of food and society that was published in 2019. As an educator, she seeks to teach to transform by educating the whole student to deepen their knowledge and academic skills, but also their engagement in the world as informed, conscientious, and accountable citizens. So I'll now turn it over to Dr. Brady for her presentation.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you for having me. It's a treat to be able to present this research whenever I get a chance, just because I think it's so important. It's a bit of a passion project of mine. So I am just going to navigate the technology to share my screen, and hopefully all works as it should. Now, I have two screens going at the same time, and usually it asks me which screen I should share. Oh, here we go, maybe this one. You can see my screen now, correct?
We can see your whole screen.
Yes. I'll just put it on presentation, and then you should be able to just see
Perfect.
my slides. So you can see just my slides now, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And not the presenter view, just the full slide?
Just the full slide.
Perfect. That's wonderful. Okay, great. So I'm going to present tonight a little bit of the research that I've been working on over the last few years. But given all of your roles with the college, I've added a bit of a focus on sort of some of the regulatory issues that I think are pertinent. But as you'll see, I think that there's lots left to be explored with respect to social justice and the regulatory issues that brings up. And of course, this is very, very pertinent because of the new ICDEPS and the way that it's acknowledged our roles in social justice. But I'll say more about that as I go through. So again, thank you very much for having me. I am really excited to present this work. By way of telling you a little bit more about myself, I'll tell you a little bit more about where I'm joining you from. So joining you from Chibuktuk, translated meaning the Great Harbor in Mi'kmaq, also known as Halifax, Nova Scotia. And so this is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet nations. And as a settler, my relationship to the land and to the people who've lived here for thousands of years is governed by the treaties of peace and friendship. Mount St. Vincent University, where I am, and so this is Chibuktuk there in the, putting the arrows pointing at Chibuktuk there, the Great Harbor. and that's where Mount St. Vincent University is located, where I think, as Laurel mentioned, I'm an assistant professor. This is me at a lobster processing plant nearby, and I always love sharing this picture because I think it's quite amusing. This is a 6.5-pound lobster. It was bigger than I am. You can see its claw span there. It's quite amazing. So I share that to you partly for a laugh, but also to note that lobster fishing and processing is a core part of the economy here in Nova Scotia, and as well employment across the entire Atlantic region. It's also part of the cultural fabric of the region, and it's a big, big business here across the Atlantic. Now, I share this with you partly to tell you a bit about where I'm from, but also partly to tell you about an ongoing dispute that you may have heard about between the commercial non-Indigenous fishers, lobster fishers, and the Mi'kmaq fishers, whose right to fish and hunt for subsistence, but also to earn a moderate livelihood, is affirmed by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which are, of course, legally binding documents between two nations, between Canada and the Mi'kmaq. Now, the dispute is nothing new. This is another iteration of an ongoing series of disputes that actually have spanned right across Canada and is certainly the symptom of an ongoing legacy of colonialism on Turtle Island. So, again, I'm telling you this partly to tell you about who I am and where I'm joining you from, but also as a way of suggesting to you that the issues at play in the current dispute are not outside of the realm of dietetic knowledge and practice, rather as an issue of health justice, food justice, and social justice. The current dispute, along with many other social justice issues, should be a concern of dietetic practitioners and the profession as a whole, and therefore is, of course, a matter of regulation. If it's within our knowledge and practice, it is, of course, pertinent to how we regulate the profession. So I want to suggest to you over the presentation that we do have a role in these types of issues. We do have a role in social justice. And it's really important, it's pressing now, in fact, with the ICDEP, to think about what our roles in social justice through our practice, but also as advocates, means for regulation. So traditionally, I would say, based on my ongoing research, my years-long research, including my PhD dissertation, traditionally the dietetic profession has seen these sort of social and political issues as outside of its knowledge base, which for the most part has focused on the science of food and nutrition. Certainly since we split with home economics, we've focused much more heavily on food and nutrition as scientific, or as, from a sort of scientific perspective. And we've then also seen it as well beyond our scope of practice to be engaged in these kinds of social, political issues, either through our practice or through advocacy. And that has, of course, then meant that it's been outside of the realm of regulation for our colleges and associations. However, I would suggest that as health professionals who have the privilege of higher education, but also who have a special platform, we have a special voice and a special authority as experts in food, nutrition, and health, that we also have a particular capacity, and I would argue because of that special capacity, we therefore have a special particular responsibility to redress injustice. Now, one of the concepts that I like to draw on to think about our responsibility comes from feminist theory. And the idea or the concept is response ability. So response ability is what it sounds like. We have the ability to respond. We have a special expertise. We have a special capacity to redress inequity, to understand it, and to understand the importance, not just from a nutritional perspective, but from a food systems perspective, from a social and cultural perspective, of the ways that things like lobster are important for communities and other foodways as well. And because we have that special capacity to respond, we then therefore have not only the ability, but the responsibility to redress injustice. And of course, as I've mentioned, we see acknowledgement of the roles that dietitians are now going to be expected to play in social justice. However, I will just note that social justice is not a new addition to our competencies, although I think we see it included in a slightly different way. Version 2.0 did name social justice, diversity, and equity in society as being part of our roles, but as the research I'm going to show you demonstrates, this has never been very well included in our knowledge base or practice as a profession. The new ICDEP's definition, or the sort of working definition that it's using to inform our roles, is actually the English Oxford Dictionary definition of social justice. And so that reads, social justice is the fair and reasonable distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. And we see social justice appear in two particular competencies. I would say that it's woven through others, particularly those that acknowledge our roles in reconciliation, in cultural safety, food systems, but we see it named here specifically. Now, something that I do want to mention, and I will expand on in the next slide, is that the English Oxford Dictionary definition of social justice is one, it comes from a particular paradigm of social justice known as distributive justice. And so the focus of distributive justice that we see emphasized in this definition is that, or the focus of justice, or the sort of indicators of justice, are distribution. And not only distribution of, distribution of resources, but not only distribution of resources, it's an equal or an equality framing of that distribution of resources. I would, from my research and my understanding of the social justice literature, suggest that this definition of social justice actually misses quite a bit that is important to justice and social justice. It misses the social and cultural aspects that are important to social justice. So for example, representation and diversity as a part of justice. The equality approach, or the fairness, also misses the ways that distribution of material resources to meet the ends of justice must sometimes be unequal. And so I would suggest that as we go forward as a profession to implement and regulate our roles in social justice, we have to be thinking about equity more so than equality, and much beyond just the sort of distributive approach. And so in my mind, the answer to what is social justice is a bit expanded beyond the definition in the ICDEPs, and this is what informs my research. So admittedly, trying to define social justice is not easy. So one of my favorite readings describes it as trying to nail Jell-O to the wall, a sticky and difficult task. And it certainly is. One of the reasons for that is because what's just in one situation is not necessarily what might be considered just in another. And so some authors, and I would agree with this, argue for the need for a reflexive approach to justice. So just to give you an example of how that plays out, is that we can think of democracy and participation in a democratic process as being part of justice. But if democratic decision-making means that we are always prioritizing the needs and wants of the majority, that can create an unjust situation when the needs of smaller sectors, but still important sectors of the population, are being overlooked because the majority rules, essentially. And so how I think of social justice is not as a single definition, but through a principles-based approach. So drawing on a number of scholars' work from across different disciplines, I understand social justice in this way. So including partly the equitable distribution of resources, burdens, benefits, but also power in society. Basic needs of individuals are being met. Peace is a condition of social justice. Political engagement and democratic decision-making, as well as supports for the capacity to do so. Self-reflection, reflexivity, and critical thinking. And what is particularly beyond the definition included in the current, the new ICDEPs, anti-racism, decolonization, reconciliation, and anti-violence. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my ongoing project that draws on this understanding of social justice.
Okay. We seem to be having some technical difficulties here. Just bear with us for a moment.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Excellent.
Oh, I got
Yes.
a pop-up box all of a sudden saying that I was muted. Okay, no problem. I will continue. So I'm not sure where you lost me there, but I'll just start by saying in broad strokes, this was a mixed methods project that looked at how social justice is included in our curricula across Canada in accredited programs, how we understand and are engaged in social justice, the degree to which practitioners believe that they are prepared to practice from a social justice framework. And finally, and what I think is ultimately important, is to understand what socially just dietetic practice looks like. And so
Dr. Brady, I'm just going to interrupt you for a second. Can you share your screen again?
Oh yeah, did it become unshared?
It did.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I'm just going to have to do that for a second. Okay, you should.
Yep, we can see it. So whenever you want to put it into the presentation, that'll be awesome.
Okay.
Perfect.
You see the full slides again?
We do.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to present a little bit of data from the first portion of the project, which is a content analysis that looked at the degree to which this content is included in our programs across Canada. And then some data on dietetic practitioners' perceptions of their preparedness to practice from this framework. And then finally, a framework that I've been working on, that I've been developing to understand or conceptualize what socially just dietetic practice looks like. So from the content analysis, what I did was I sampled all of the required course descriptions for all English-speaking undergraduate dietetic programs in Canada. I did a quantitative analysis that looked at the frequency of 40 unique search terms that you can see in the box there. And these were broadly drawn from literature on social justice to cast as wide a net as possible to understand what the degree to which it's included in our programs. And then I also did a qualitative analysis on the course descriptions to look thematically at what was being included. And so quantitative results from that analysis, I analyzed 403 different course descriptions from across the 19 different programs in English-speaking programs in Canada. Out of those 403 courses and the 40 unique terms, there were only 63 instances where any of those terms were used, and some of them were repeats. So overall, very low inclusion in anything that would kind of indicate, at least from the course descriptions, that this kind of content's being included in our programs. Most frequently was critical, so this could be critical thinking most of the time. Counseling, which is sort of a bit of a arm's length from social justice, but we still included it. Food security, food insecurity, diversity, determinants of health, and then the social determinants of health. All of the other terms were either included less than 3 times or 3 times or less, and the majority, 25 of the 40, didn't appear at all. And you can see across Canada, there's a range in how frequently that they were included in the different programs by province. So from a qualitative perspective, when we did a thematic analysis of the course descriptions, 2 key themes emerged. The first is that we have a really competing conceptualization of social justice and dietitians' roles. So on one hand, I could see evidence of social justice issues being seen as simply barriers to client behavior change. So an example of how that appeared was this phrase that was taken from one of the course descriptions: techniques and skills as applicable to the dietitian's role as communicator, interviewer, counselor, educator, motivator, and nutrition behavior change specialist. So that was a course description where social justice terms would have been included in some capacity, but it was framed in this way that it was mostly our goal was to overcome those barriers or to help clients overcome those barriers rather than, for example, addressing them at a structural level through advocacy, as an example. And this was then, that did appear in some course descriptions where we conceived of our roles, at least in the course content, as people who could address the root causes of injustice, like poverty or racism. So in this instance, it appeared like this: students will be introduced to core sociological concepts used to understand social inequality, social order, social change, and globalization. So that's quite a different framing of how we might see ourselves as engaged in social justice work. Second main theme was that there was a clear prioritization of science-based knowledge and ways of knowing. And I'm not saying science is bad or should change, but in thinking about our roles in social justice, this needs to include necessarily other ways of knowing. Our roles in reconciliation are not going to be facilitated by science alone. We need to get comfortable and understand that we need to include other ways of knowing the world. And so this is probably my favorite quote. So this, again, was a course description that included some sort of social justice framing, but you can see that there's still in the course prioritization of science. So this course deals with contemporary issues, including organic foods, GMOs, nanotechnology, nutrition trends, food ingredients, molecular gastronomy, and food security will also be addressed. So, and I'm not knocking this one particular course. As an educator, I do understand that it's not always easy to get course descriptions changed, and they don't always necessarily reflect exactly what's going on in the course. But to whatever degree our course descriptions are a litmus test for the extent to which social justice is included in our programs, this is certainly what I found. So with respect to the other research question that I showed you about dietetic practitioners' perceptions of their preparedness from their education and training, I did an online survey, and you can see the data table there, profile of the survey respondents. So the largest proportion were in clinical care, slightly weighted to fewer years of experience, but still a range across. And the highest bachelor, or the highest degree for most, was a bachelor degree. Few moved on to, just over 2/3, or just about 2/3 moved on to a master's degree. So I used a couple definitions to ask practitioners about their preparedness. So socially just practice was defined this way, and it was purposefully left open about what their understanding of social justice was in order to capture a wide range, because again, it's very difficult to define social justice, and I didn't want to deter anybody. I wanted to hear what they thought social justice was and the way that they implemented it, and the degree to which they were prepared for it. And then socially just advocacy was defined this way, so including collective or individual action aimed at changing inequities at a structural or systemic level. And I'm just going to show you a wee bit of data from that. Essentially, the data from this data set confirms what I showed you from the content analysis, that we are not including social justice in our programs to any great extent. So most of the practitioners indicated that they felt very ill prepared to practice from a social justice perspective. So I'm showing you the data from just those folks who answered either strongly disagree or disagree. So I'm showing you in total, who disagreed or strongly disagreed to the following statements. So knowledge or skill-based learning about social justice or social justice advocacy should not be a part of dietetic education. So most 82% of the respondents felt or disagreed with that statement, indicating that they felt it should be included. However, the majority felt that knowledge-based learning related to those topics was not adequately incorporated. Similarly, they felt that skill-based learning was not adequately incorporated. Many reported in the qualitative portions that they felt knowledgeable, but they felt they didn't know what to do with the knowledge when it came to actually implementing it in their practice. And so that was an important distinction between knowledge and skill. Most felt that they were not adequately prepared in their education and training to engage in advocacy related to social justice concerns. Most felt they weren't adequately prepared in the skills to engage in advocacy. And then also of concern is that even when people had the knowledge and possibly the skills, many reported lacking the confidence to engage in social justice advocacy. And I'll show you some of the rationale for that in just a second. We also asked people about common barriers. And so folks reported a number of different barriers. A was the lack of knowledge, skills, and confidence that came through in the survey, but also the emotional toll of the work, many mentioned. Potential threats to job security if doing this kind of work was not welcome in their jobs or perceived to be. Lack of time and or just mental bandwidth. Pressure to provide accountability and evidence, and of course addressing social justice in practice, such as through client care and how it impacts client lives, isn't necessarily measurable in the way that blood sugar is or blood pressure. Lack of support from employers, colleagues, and dietetic peers as well was mentioned. Sense of isolation, a sense of powerlessness, burnout, and a fear of getting it wrong. So just again, that sort of feeling ill-prepared. So what I drew from this work and some of the other work that I've been doing in this area is that we definitely have limited inclusion of knowledge and skill-based learning with respect to social justice. Practitioners overwhelmingly feel ill-prepared with the knowledge, skills, and confidence to practice from this framework. And ultimately, what we need, in my view, is a framework to conceptualize what socially just dietetic practice and advocacy mean and look like in order to inform education practice, but also regulation. We can't evaluate and assess if we don't know exactly what we're evaluating and assessing. And I feel like we're at that point right now that we're not very clear on what social justice implemented through practice actually looks like and actually entails. However, I have been working on such a framework, and this is essentially what I've come up with so far, but I'd be very keen to hear from you all as regulators what you see as the challenges from a regulatory perspective in thinking about what our roles should be or could be in social justice and practicing from a social justice perspective. So for me, obviously these regulatory mechanisms are key to thinking about how we implement what socially just practice might include. So for me, it includes acknowledging power inequities within practice, but also with our responsibility as a profession in the wider world. Redressing existing power inequities and implementing anti-oppressive praxis. So praxis being an extension beyond practice to include those conceptual and theoretical ways of thinking and understanding injustice and how power manifests in the world. And that this, for me, needs to exist across three levels. through reflexive practice at an individual level, through anti-oppressive practice at an interpersonal level, so with clients, with colleagues, dietetic peers, with students and interns, and then structural competence. So that's things like creating structural change, policy, as an example, through advocacy. And then this needs to be threaded through all components of practice: education, research, client and community nutrition care, and then food service and systems. So just briefly before I end, some implications for regulation, of course. We have to think about regulators' roles in public protection and preventing harm. So traditionally, this has been focused on nutrition care and medical nutrition therapy, but I would argue that if through not practicing in a socially just way, if we're causing harm through perpetuating stigma and discrimination, then we are causing harm to the public. If we aren't diverse as a profession and therefore servicing a diverse population, I would say that that's also causing harm to the profession. And so I think that that gives us reason to think about this as a regulatory issue. And of course, regulators have a role, a seat at the PDEP table. And so thinking about ICDEP implementation with version 3.0 is important. I mentioned already that we need a conceptual model of socially just dietetic practice, in my view, to inform things like the CDRE and to inform accreditation. And then also to inform how we measure, assess, and evaluate competence in things like equity, diversity, and social justice. And that wraps up my review of my research. I know it's quite quick and it's quite a big project, but I hope I've given you some highlights and something to think about. And I would be very happy to take questions and or thoughts about how you see this as being a regulatory issue, or what's on your mind as regulators.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Brady. That was a fantastic presentation. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise and what you found out. I'm sure some of the attendees tonight responded to that survey, so that's exciting.
Yeah, probably.
So at this time, if anyone has any questions or comments, please type them in the chat box, and then I can relay them to Dr. Brady here. She has been very gracious with her time and that, but please do. I'd like to start things off with a question, thinking as, again, a lot of the attendees here are practicing dietitians. You know, we're seeing clients in clinic or on the ward or whatever it is on that frontline kind of level there. So we're, you know, I think that's, as your research showed, that's where a lot of people are feeling kind of stuck. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions on, you know, places to start to get yourself unstuck?
Yeah,
moving forward.
It's such a good question, and it's this. I get that question every time I present this work, and you know, we're all at different learning places with respect to social justice, but then also social justice as it applies to our practice. And that came out loud and clear from the survey. Like I said, many said they had the knowledge, but then translating that knowledge into practice is an additional leap that I think, you know, we face as practitioners, of course. So where to start depends on where you are at now. But I would say if you're sort of starting at ground zero and this feels very overwhelming and feels like, you know, we're trying to move mountains, then I would say it starts quite simply with acknowledging that this feels big and scary and overwhelming and not really sure where to go. And then a few different things. There's no really wrong way to start. So pick up a book, look online, do some reading, reach out to colleagues about what they're doing. One place that's a wealth of information and networking is Critical Dietetics. So you can find Critical Dietetics. It's an association of practitioners and dietetic scholars and others who are very engaged in thinking about what social justice means for dietetic practice and have been. We've been around for 10 years now. We have a Facebook page. We have a journal called the Journal of Critical Dietetics. There's many articles that you can begin reading that are all focused around nutrition, food, nutrition professionals, and or dietetic practice. So that's a good place to start. Our conference is actually coming up. It's going to be online throughout November. So if you Google us, Critical Dietetics, you'll find information about that. Yeah, so I guess that's where I would start. If you already are well connected, then it's just a matter of continuing to read and learn and foster those connections that you have. Yeah, that's what I would say to start. The danger that I want to make sure that people don't feel, even though this feels overwhelming, is that it's really easy to feel immobilized by the weight of it, to turn away and to say, oh, this is too much, it's too scary, I can't do this, it doesn't apply to me. It absolutely applies to you. I would say living in a democratic country where these issues are very important, we all have a role as citizens, but again, with the special expertise and voices and platform that we have, I think we also have that responsibility and therefore responsibility as a profession and as practitioners to address it.
That's great. Thank you.
That answers your question.
Yeah. I think that's really great. And that's, like you say, a lot of people have that on their mind. The desire is there, but the know-how is lacking sometimes. I guess a follow-up question. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say it's understandable because, you know, we haven't been taught this traditionally, as my research shows, and my PhD dissertation was on a very similar topic and had similar findings that were not well prepared. So I wouldn't say it's the failing of any practitioners out there who might be feeling overwhelmed. You know, it's something that's come out of our history as a profession, and yeah, something that we have to confront now. But yeah, the key is not to turn away from it. So yeah.
Absolutely. I have a follow-up question to that.
Yeah.
Again, as many people are working within public health systems or larger bodies, sometimes the organizational or employer expectations can feel like they get in the way of that, or we're not sure how we can advocate when we are supposed to, or when there are expectations of being the image of an organization or following the organization's role and things like that. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that for us.
Yeah, that was another significant barrier that folks in public health mentioned, and that I've had just not just research findings, just in talking to, you know, friends and colleagues who are working in public health in Nova Scotia, are definitely frustrated by the you know, directives sometimes that they get to not engage in advocacy. Specifically are told that they cannot do that. Yeah, I mean, obviously you have to do what you have to do, and losing your job or you know, doing something that you're not supposed to be doing is not going to help anybody. I think it's a matter of you know, figuring out how to navigate that role. I think that is something, though, that the profession as a whole could be addressing. So when I say the profession as a whole, I'm talking about like Dietitians of Canada and regulators too. And I know regulators don't, you know, have a sort of public communications mandate in the way that Dietitians of Canada does. But I think in showing ourselves to be prepared and engaged in those things, I think it changes the sort of perception or view of what we do. So I guess I don't have a, like, we need to do this particular thing to address that barrier. At an individual level, navigating that with your employer, I think, is key. But I think as a profession, we can begin to sort of show ourselves to be engaged in those things, and perhaps that will pave the way for more engagement in that.
Okay. So taking that, using those larger bodies to which many of us belong as a tool to do that if we can't, for whatever reason, do it in our individual practices the way that we would like to.
Absolutely. So as an individual public health RD, you might not be able to do it, but lending your voice within the profession, letting Dietitians of Canada know that it's important to you, that they advocate on behalf of an issue, or doing so collectively, maybe not individually as a practitioner, but collectively, I think can still go a long way.
Absolutely. Excellent. Thank you. I think we have a couple moments, so if there are any other questions, I would encourage you to put them in the chat box. And again, if you are on the phone and you would like to add a comment or question, you can unmute yourself using *6, and we'd love to hear from you. Okay.
People are welcome to reach out. My email's there. If people want to get in touch, I'm happy to chat or answer questions that way as well.
Okay, excellent. Well, with that, thank you so much, Dr. Brady.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being willing to share your time and expertise with us. Our attendees tonight, our members, are really appreciative of this, and I think this is going to give us a lot to think about going forward, and it's just been really wonderful having you. So thank you again.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Have a lovely night.
Yes, you too.
I will depart. All right. Bye.
All right. Well, that was a wonderful presentation. It's certainly given me a lot more to think about tonight, and I hope it was educational and thought-provoking for you all as well. We're going to return to the rest of our meeting agenda tonight. And the next item on our agenda we have some proposed bylaw amendments. All right. So Council is recommending changes to 2 bylaws, Article 7.3 elections and 17.5 investments. And the bylaw amendments were pre-circulated with the AGM package as well. So just a quick overview of what we're recommending here. For Article 7.3 elections, the existing bylaw requires that the registrar oversee council elections. However, since the registrar reports to council, council is recommending that the oversight role be taken over by the council governance committee. So the amendments involve changing the word registrar to governance committee throughout the subarticles of Article 7 or subarticles of Article 7.3. And the next bylaw amendment is to Article 17.5. The existing bylaw here restricts investment to low-risk securities only. So in the current economic circumstances, low-risk investments are not keeping pace with inflation, and so Council recommends the amendment of the bylaw to allow more flexibility to use low and medium-risk investments to preserve capital and provide long-term growth while ensuring stability without limiting the rate of return. So bylaw amendments require approval from the members of the college. So in order to amend these bylaws or to have this, we do require a vote for this process. We will not be doing this over the polls function tonight or through the chat. We will be doing the voting through the voting function on the CDM website. And the voting will open after the meeting tonight, and it will remain open until October 9th. So if you're not familiar with that, when you navigate to the CDM website, you use your username and login to log into the member portal. And once you're in the member portal, there is a voting tab on the left-hand side. And so you can choose that, and that's where the vote will be for these bylaw amendments. So just remember that the polls are open until November 9th, and we really appreciate your response as we are all members of the college together. And if you are unsure, the amendments are also posted on the website for your reference as you make your decisions. So if you have any questions about the bylaw amendments that council is proposing, please enter them into the chat box now. And again, if you're on the telephone, you can unmute yourself at *6. So I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to think about that and enter any chats. All right. Seeing none, I will move on to our next item on the agenda tonight. So it is my pleasure now to announce the College Council for the 2020-2021 year. We have two members of council who are leaving at present. Amy Hui and Laura Taves are stepping down from council, and we thank you both very much for your dedication over the past several years. As many of you are aware, we had a call for nominations to fill these seats, and we did have an election this year, and that election closed on Monday evening on October the 26th. And I'm pleased to announce tonight that Nikki Harlishan and Lorna Shaw were elected to council. And so their 2-year terms will begin in November. So welcome to council. And at this point, I also want to recognize our 4 public appointees, Karen Kumka, Stephen Graham, Julia Todd, and Helga Wedden. Their contributions, time, expertise has been invaluable for us, and we appreciate them supporting the important work that we do here. And lastly, I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who has volunteered with the college in many various roles over the last year. Again, we couldn't do the work that we do without member volunteers. These are very, very important roles that we take on here. We do have various committees. For example, the Board of Assessors, the Screening Committee, the Audit Committee, the Complaints Committee, Professional Standards Committee, and others as well. And so thank you to all of you who have volunteered your time and energy towards these projects to strengthen our profession and ensure the safety of the public. And that brings us to our last item tonight. There were no additional formal motions to be added to the agenda for tonight. Therefore, the CDM 2020 Annual General Meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all for joining us and for your patience with the technological difficulties. I'm sure we're all used to those right now. I do hope that that this was an exciting experience, well, a good experience for everyone, and I'm really glad that so many of us, and hopefully more of us across the province, could be joined together tonight. So again, thank you to everyone. If you do have more questions, you can reach Dr. Brady, or you can send them to us and we can pass them along to Dr. Brady if there's anything else that you wanted with that. As always, if you have any questions about what is going on here as the council chair, I am so happy to field those questions and all of that. And of course, anytime you can call our fabulous staff here at the college. So thank you everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, and hopefully next year we'll be back in person.